Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. 76 years after the Korean War began, the security environment on the Korean Peninsula continues to evolve. North Korea is expanding its military capabilities, strengthening ties with Russia, and showing no sign of easing its confrontational stance towards the south. As these developments reshape the regional security landscape, we'll examine where North Korea's strategy is heading and what it means for the future of the Korean Peninsula. And for this, we're joined in the studio by Go Myung-hyun, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. A very big welcome.
It's good to be with you.
And also joining us is Revere, former acting U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs and non-resident senior fellow in the Foreign Policy Program at Brookings. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Great to be with you again.
So let's start our discussion with Mr. Revere. Like I've said yesterday, June 25th marked the 76th anniversary of the Korean War. In his commemorative speech, President Lee Jae-myung did not directly mention North Korea or the North Korean military as well. What do you think that suggests about his North Korea policy and the U.S. ROK alliance as well?
Well, I think what happened at the speech yesterday is another manifestation of the policy approach that President Lee and his administration have taken towards North Korea, in which the Republic of Korea takes great pains to avoid criticizing or provoking North Korea, even as Pyongyang does not reciprocate in its own actions and its own behavior. I think Seoul continues to use unusually moderate language when it comes to North Korea, even as Pyongyang continues to deliver some very blistering attacks against the South, as North Korea continues to ramp up its military capabilities, and also as North Korea continues to reject dialogue with the South and rejects any efforts to achieve reconciliation with the Republic of Korea. I thought it was good that President Lee, in his speech, properly paid tribute to the South Korean veterans who fought and died in the Korean War. But at the same time, he also, I think, failed to make the core point that the suffering of these soldiers and the sacrifices that they had made were the result of a violent war begun by North Korea that was aimed at destroying the Republic of Korea and uniting the Korean Peninsula under the North's rule. Meanwhile, as President Lee was avoiding mentioning the obvious, Kim Jong-un was supervising ballistic missile testing and calling for the North's military to strengthen its, the words used, deadly and destructive offensive posture. So to sort of sum things up, I think there's a very curious imbalance between South Korea's rhetoric and that of North Korea. It suggests that Seoul is quite determined to stay the course in its conciliatory policy towards Pyongyang, even when it is faced with the blunt reality of North Korea's rhetoric and actions. And this approach has elicited some sharp criticism in South Korea. And so has the fact that President Lee also failed to mention the US-ROK alliance and the role the United States played in coming to South Korea's aid in 1950. So I think in conclusion, it would be fair to say that the speech and its curious omissions probably raised some eyebrows among many U.S. supporters of a strong US-ROK alliance, particularly in Washington.
As Mr. Revere has just pointed out, North Korea again called South Korea its most hostile state, and leader Kim Jong-un observed a test of new strike weapons on the anniversary of the Korean War. Despite these kinds of open gestures from the South. So to what extent do you think has North Korea's two-state policy has become kind of permanent?
So it's been highly institutionalized by now. The so-called two hostile states doctrine started by the end of 2023 at the year's end plenary session, where Kim Jong-un announced that there's a new definition of intercolonial relations. It's called two hostile states. And since then, the North Korean regime has embarked in a systematic strategy to institutionalize this doctrine. So the most recent the most recent significant steps have been taken this year. Earlier in February, and in the Ninth Party Congress, Kim Jong-un and then the regime announced that the hostile states doctrine will be enshrined in the new the Korea Workers' Party's chapter. And now, in just just now, this month, and yesterday, Kim Jong-un announced that, not this month, last month, Kim Jong-un and the regime has also announced that the two hostile states doctrine will be part of the new constitution. So it shows, so now, by now it has taken 3 years, and then the North Korean regime has taken progressive steps to make it part of the North Korean state doctrine as well as ideology. And this has the role or aim of sending, first of all, the strong message to the domestic audience that the new relationship between, or lack of thereof, between the two Koreas is now permanent. So, and then this forms the basis of some of the very oppressive laws that the regime has passed in the recent years, such as the anti-revolutionary laws, such as laws that target the consumption of South Korean cultural products. So there's now a strong, high-level justification for such actions and legal legislations. And the second, it serves the purpose of sending a message to South Korea and the United States that North Korea is not going to, first of all, not just engage South Korea in dialogue, but also demands South Korea to consider North Korea to be not just a separate entity, but a significant regional power. So these two hostile states doctrine cannot be understood separately from North Korea's nuclear capability. So this, in fact, the two concepts are mutually reinforcing, and that's the reason why North Korea has been very persistent in pushing this message, despite the fact that this promulgation of the two hostile states doctrine undermines much of the North Korea's legitimate claim to be the most important Korea of the two Koreas, and also it also undermines the claim for historical legitimacy that the Kim Jong-un's father, Kim Jong-il, as well as the founder of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, have long pursued. So I think North Korea is paying a huge price for this, but at the same time, the regime probably believes it serves the purpose of reinforcing its claim to be a nuclear power or weapons state, as well as the fact that it's going to be a regional power from now on.
So this hardline stance is becoming increasingly institutionalized.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, if we turn to North Korea's military buildup, Mr. Revere, Pyongyang recently stressed strengthening its nuclear forces and then deployed its 5,000-ton destroyer Cheohyun. How is Washington viewing these kinds of moves from the North? Are they seen as a major new threat?
Well, I don't think the launching of one destroyer is going to change the balance of power on and around the Korean Peninsula in any significant way. I think the real challenge facing U.S. policymakers in Washington right now is the ongoing buildup of the KPA, the North Korean military's capabilities, particularly its nuclear weapons and the means to deliver these weapons. But also there is the clarity and the emphasis which North Korea is rejecting any possibility of denuclearization or even any discussion of that topic. North Korea has very strongly underscored its position that it is and is going to remain a nuclear weapons power, and it wants to be treated as such. So right now, from a policy perspective, there are no mechanisms in place to moderate or stop North Korea's buildup, and no apparent way to convince North Korea to ever return to the negotiating table to discuss the end of its nuclear weapons program. So I think in some, U.S. policymakers are at a very important crossroads as they try to grapple with this important new reality. There are important decisions that need to be made in terms of crafting an approach that can effectively respond to the growing danger of the North's arsenal. My biggest concern is that there is also a growing school of thought in the United States that the time has come perhaps to accept the reality of North Korea's nuclear status and seek arms control talks. Whenever I hear such talk, I always pose the following question. Why would North Korea ever be more faithful to an arms control agreement than it was to its past denuclearization commitments? No one has yet to give me a good answer to that question.
So things are really changing in this aspect. But let us continue with Chae-hyun first. So it has been deployed to the West Sea instead of the East Sea. Could you explain for our viewers what do you think is behind this, and why is North Korea putting some more emphasis on naval power?
Well, first of all, I think this is an indication that North Korea, the regime, is prepared to challenge the conventional superiority of the South Korean Navy in the West Sea. So the West Sea happens to be not everywhere in the West Sea, but then the maritime limit between the border between the two Koreas, called the Northern Limit Line, has been a conflict zone area for a long time. There's the most recently. Actually, the conflict goes way back, but then in the 21st century, in 2002, there's been naval skirmishes, which led to casualties on both sides. And that happened again in 2010 when the Cheonan corvette has been sunk by the North Korean attack. So that's has become quite a major area of a conflict between the two Koreas. And every time South Korea has demonstrated its conventional advantage, sometimes absolute advantage over the North, and that's always been problematic for the North Koreans. So I think the North Koreans are building this cutting-edge guided missile destroyer to send a message that from now on, North Korea is ready to challenge the South Korean supremacy on the seas. So I think this is a primary message that Kim Jong-un is trying to send. And the second message is the demonstrating or showing off North Korea's industrial capability. So far, the last time the North Korean actually showcased the new form of destroyers, it was that revealing what took place in the East Sea. And now there's a production facility there on the east coast of North Korea. Now this time, this Cheon destroyer was actually built in the West Sea, in Nampo. So North Korea has doubled its naval capability. And this is probably, it comes as a shock to many observers because modern day guided missile destroyer is very expensive. So in that sense, North Korea is showing to the world that it's not just not suffering the impact of sanctions, in fact, flourishing. So this is another message. And lastly, this is a major challenge to South Korea's missile defense systems, because now North Korea can launch nuclear-tipped cruise missiles from the West Sea. So this essentially increases the chance of a surprise nuclear attack against the South, as well as increase the chance of a survival of North Koreans' nuclear assets. So it's actually a triple dilemma for the South Korea and also as the United States.
Right, it's really a sign of expanding its naval strategy. Now, if we look beyond the Korean Peninsula, Mr. Revere, North Korea and Russia are reportedly preparing a 5-year military cooperation plan. How likely do you think are possible joint naval drills, and what kind of risks would they pose to the regional security?
Good question. I think joint naval exercises, port visits, personnel exchanges, and perhaps even joint planning would be, all of those things I think would be logical components of a more robust DPRK-Russia naval relationship. And I think all of these things would be very concerning developments, making an already complicated security and defense situation in the region even more so. So I would strongly suspect that policymakers in Washington and Seoul and elsewhere in the region are looking very carefully at this and do not see this as a very helpful or healthy development.
Now, meanwhile, North Korea has largely blocked reports on the recent U.S.-Iran ceasefire. Why is this so? Why do you think they're concerned about this?
Well, that's surprising for me as well, because I don't see much issue with sharing the news of the signing of the memorandum of understanding between Iran and the United States, because in fact favors Iran by large measure. So it shouldn't be such a controversial issue for North Korean people to be exposed to. In fact, could help in North Korea in increasing propaganda, showing that the United States is weak, it's willing to negotiate with countries like Iran, which are a bedfellow to North Korea. North Korea and Iran have a very close relations. But I think the reason why they are not sharing this news with the domestic North Korean audience in real time is because I think North Koreans are trying to find an angle that favors them the most. I think they are taking their sweet time to analyze the MOU and essentially trying to extract the best message that serves their propaganda purposes. And I think if this in the interpretation of the delay is right, then I think we're going to see a major coverage of the MOU between the United States and Iran in the coming days.
So they're choosing their best angle to show their people. But some analysts actually say that Iran's deal could become a model for North Korea as well. Mr. Revere, if U.S.-North Korea talks resume, how likely is Pyongyang to push for a nuclear freeze or arms control instead of denuclearization? And how do you think Seoul and Washington could respond?
It's really ironic that we're having this discussion because the JCPOA between the United States and Iran that was negotiated by a superb team of diplomats and experts during the Obama administration was based on the expertise that these experts had in dealing with North Korea. And if you go back and look at much of the language in the JCPOA, it was put into the agreement to prevent Iran from going down the path that ultimately led North Korea to becoming a de facto nuclear weapons power. President Donald Trump obviously killed the JCPOA, which was unfortunate because that was probably our last best hope for managing the Iran nuclear issue. But as I said earlier, North Korea is now and intends to remain a nuclear weapons power and wants to be accepted as such. North Korea might agree to an arms control dialogue, primarily as a way of gaining such acceptance. But the reality is that the only arms that North Korea really wishes to control are those that the United States deploys against North Korea. And I should add, of course, that North Korea has also made it clear over the years it is never going to allow the inspections that would be necessary to monitor a freeze. So a freeze would be of dubious value.
Then what about South Korea and the U.S.? How do you think we should react to these kinds of reaction?
Well, that's a tough question because where we are right now is at the crossroads I suggested earlier, and South Korea is standing at the same crossroads as the United States policymakers are. And we need to have some very intense discussions between our two sides to talk about what a future discussion with North Korea would look like, what it would contain, what it should not contain. That's going to be a very tough piece of coordination, but it's also going to be an essential one.
Right. More talks will be necessary on that front. Now, on another note, President Trump recently extended the U.S. national emergency on North Korea for another year. Dr. Go, is this simply about maintaining pressure, or is it meant to, preserve some leverage?
It's a very formal step that is done every year. And the reason why this is done on a periodic basis is because even though the use of sanctions by the U.S. government has been so often and normalized for such a long time, we see that as a natural part of the U.S. foreign policy. But in fact, it's actually a very extraordinary measure by the U.S. president. Sanctions power has often been reserved for wartime. So for the U.S. president to issue sanctions measure during peacetime takes a special legislation, even though it's been done so often that it seems normal, but it's not normal. So, because the U.S. president is using the wartime powers to issue sanctions during peacetime, so what it requires is actually a legal sequencing. So what has to come first to enable U.S. president to issue sanctions is actually for the U.S. president to declare a national emergency. Because it's a national emergency, now the U.S. president can borrow or use wartime powers that he has during peacetime. So in order to issue sanctions, which is actually stipulated in the Sanctions Act called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, he needs to declare a national emergency first. And because this is an extraordinary measure, this declaration cannot cannot last in perpetuity. So it has to be renewed on a periodic basis. So this is the reason why President Trump is issuing this declaration, just because he needs to maintain the sanctions regime in North Korea. So in a way, the long story short, what it means is for the United States to maintain the sanctions measures, which is actually the only leverage that the international community has left vis-a-vis North Korea, he needs to issue this and renew the national emergency of North Korea.
to maintain this kinds of international sanctions. But just previously, President Lee said President Trump remains willing to engage Kim Jong-un and supports a phased approach to the North Korean nuclear issue. Mr. Revere, could that approach become an official policy under the second Trump administration?
I don't think there's any doubt that Donald Trump is keenly interested in meeting with Kim Jong-un again. At this point, it's hard to know what the content of that discussion would be, but I think there's interest in Washington in having that discussion. But regarding the idea of the phased approach, I've yet to hear an explanation of what a phased approach on the North Korea nuclear issue would be, particularly since there is no approach involving the end of North Korea's nuclear program that North Korea would ever accept or even discuss. So, as I said earlier, we are in a very new place in dealing with a nuclear-armed North Korea, and we need some new thinking. But I don't know that this notion of a phased approach is the kind of new thinking that's going to get us to where we need to get.
Right, so we'll have to find new measures to adapt to this new North Korea that we're seeing right now. But as for now, we'll have to leave our discussion right here. Thank you so much for your insights, Mr. Revere.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, Dr. Go, we really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame tonight. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.